So there were two famous experiments in the 1970s, situationist experiments, which you guys might have heard of. The first was by Stanley Milgram, who was a Jewish emigre from Europe. His family had fled Europe in World War II. And he was wondering, why did so much of Germany go along with the Nazis? Were they just rotten to the core, or were they just kind of going along the situation? So he did an experiment. He got volunteers into a room and said, now you're going to be testing out how well someone remembers something. There was someone else behind a glass screen, and they said, we're going to test this person here, how good his memory is. If he fails in a memory test, I want you to give him an electric shock. Unbeknownst to them, the person behind the glass screen was an actor. And the guy always got it wrong, so he was constantly getting shocked. But he wasn't actually getting shocked, he was an actor. So the first shock was like 100 volts. The guy was obviously in pain, he was kind of screaming and yelping. Then, some people said, are you sure we should go on? And the person would say, no, go on, you must go on. Then the voltage got up to like 350 watts. At this point, the guy was begging them, please stop this experiment, please stop, this is outrageous. And the person would still say, you've got to go on, you must go on, you have no choice. Then, if they kept on going, they got to 450 volts. At this point, the person was unconscious, not moving, possibly even dead. And they asked psychologists, how many people do you think would go up to 450 volts, all that way? And psychologists said before this experiment, maybe 1% of that kind of, full-on sadism. How many people actually went all that way? 65%. And the reason is not necessarily that they're sadists, it's because there was a man in a white suit telling them, you must go on, it's not your responsibility, you should carry on. So it's to do with these kind of, that's what they call the authority bias. You obey someone if they seem like they're an authority, and they seem like they're taking responsibility, so you're just following orders. Another famous experiment by a colleague of Milgram's, Philip Zimbardo, kind of famous situation psychologist, called the Stanford prison experiment. It took 20 volunteers, people your age, about kind of in their 20s. Stanford students in the 1970s, all of them quite liberal, kind of hippie people. And he said, we're going to make 10 of you the prison guards and 10 of you the prisoners, and we're going to do this kind of role play. They took a room in the basement of Stanford campus, and they gave the guards prison uniforms, sunglasses to make them anonymous, truncheons, all of this, the whole kit. And they gave the prisoners numbers, they kind of put them in sheets. And saw to what extent people would get into the situation. None of these people had any kind of pathological records, mental health or anything like that. Normal people, just like us. What happens if you put them in that situation? The experiment was meant to run for 2 weeks. They had to stop it after less than a week because some of the guards had become so sadist, and 3 of the prisoners had like emotional breakdowns. They were doing things that Zimbardo then saw people do in Abu Ghraib. They were making them simulate, sex acts. They were putting them in kind of isolation the whole night. They'd forgotten that they were an experiment. They were completely absorbed in the situation and the role that they were playing. So that's the kind of, the dark side. What are the implications of this? Does this mean that the Greeks are completely wrong? That we don't have any free will, we don't have any rationality, that we can't be held responsible for anything because it's all just a situation, right? Or it's all just these pressures and our own stupid minds. The good news is that that's not necessarily the case. That might be a misunderstanding of the Greeks. The Greek philosophers didn't say that we all are free, rational, moral creatures. They said that we could become so, but only through hard training. And that was the point of philosophy. Philosophy in the ancient world was a form of practice, a daily practice that you use to develop your reason and your ability to make the right choice, even under pressure. If you look back at Greek philosophy, particularly things like Stoicism, you see it's a whole set of practices and exercises that people practice to try and train themselves to kind of be aware, to be mindful, to be rational, to be morally strong as well. What we've seen is that cognitive therapy has started to use a lot of the exercises and techniques from ancient Greek philosophy that they used to train people to overcome their kind of irrationality and biases. So CBT, which is now cognitive behavioral therapy, it's now the most popular form of therapy, was directly inspired by Stoic philosophy, by ancient Greek philosophy. And it uses its techniques. So if you go and see a cognitive behavioral therapist, they will practice what they call the Socratic method, which is using questions to get people to think through their beliefs and their assumptions and make them think, is this really the case? Is this really the fact? To train them to start critically analysing their own assumptions and beliefs. And the idea is that after a few weeks of therapy, you'll learn how to do it yourself. You'll learn how to play Socrates to your own beliefs and assumptions. They also use the journal, which is the kind of classic technology used in ancient philosophy, where you write down your thoughts, you keep track of what you've done, what you've thought, what you've felt through the day. So you start to bring what is unconscious and automatic into consciousness. So that was a big technique in ancient philosophy. It's also very much used in cognitive therapy. They use the idea of training your attention to the present moment. We heard in the last talk about this Sufi idea, that Sufis are like sons of the present. It's very much the same idea in Greek philosophy. One of the key techniques is about training your attention to the present, so that you're not kind of, lost in the past or future, but you're aware of what you're doing at the present moment. So CBT has applied some of these techniques, and it's built up quite a body of evidence that we can overcome these biases. So it helps about 60% of people overcome depression and overcome anxiety, which means overcoming their kind of irrational view of the world and kicking in their conscious mind, at least for a few weeks, to kind of, wean out, is we're beginning to see that kind of idea of training the self be applied to other fields. So behavioral economists are brilliant at showing how in economics we make lots of irrational decisions. The question they haven't yet answered is, can we train ourselves to be more rational and dispassionate? So that's one of the things I'm interested in, whether investors, for example, can be trained to be more dispassionate, critical, rational. I think they can. For example, when I speak to investors, I write about philosophy and I write about finance as well. Investors, one of the things they do is, like they say, if you want to make wise, dispassionate decisions that aren't driven by automatic mind, don't make economic decisions in the heat of the moment. They did a study of investors who checked their portfolios every day and investors who checked their portfolio once a quarter. The investors who checked their portfolio once a quarter did much better, because the investors who checked their portfolio every day were making decisions in the heat of the moment when their automatic mind was all fired up and they tended to make bad, dumb decisions. So you slow down your decision-making process. You can do this whether you're, even if you're not an investor. If you have a big decision to make, don't rush it. There's a quote from the philosopher Epictetus: practice saying to every impression, stay a while, let me see you for what you are. So you can practice just putting speed bumps in your own decision-making process. You can also just, practice what the Stoics called guarding against yourself, not assuming that you're right in your assumptions about reality. They did a survey of investors. Most investors believe that, humans are prone to irrational decision-making, but almost all of them think they're the exception. It's everybody else apart from them. So you have to kind of recognize that you're a human too, which means you're working with this quite kind of limited mainframe. You're going to make some bad decisions. And you can understand your own biases. You can try to become conscious of what are your blind spots. What are the ways that you typically misinterpret reality. And you can try to watch out for them yourself. You can practice kind of impulse control. It's another way of putting a speed bump into the automatic system. So whether that be meditation or practicing fasting, for example, these are all ways that we can kind of slow down our kind of animal mind. So yeah, I've probably gone over 9 minutes, but basically the message I want to end is that we're not free, rational, moral creatures, but that doesn't mean that we can't become more so through training.
What can you do to recommend?
Basically, I'm very into like Stoic philosophy, and they have these set of trainings, like things like using a journal, like practicing the Socratic method on yourself, so questioning yourself, using a handbook. So it's not just about making the automatic thinking more conscious, it's also about making your conscious thinking automatic. We can't think consciously all the time, it's too tiring. So this idea of taking philosophical principles and practicing them and repeating them until they become like second nature. So they would carry around these handbooks, they are called in Roman the Enchiridion, and you would repeat these philosophical ideas in these little bite-sized chunks over and over until they become kind of second nature. So when you're in a situation, these things will just kind of pop into your mind immediately, and you'll know what to do and what to behave.
People really need mentors for clapping mentors.
Well, it's mentors. They're not so many of them around, but yeah, you would go and have a teacher.
As an induction.
Yeah, you would go and you'd have a teacher and they'd kind of coruscate to you and be really rude to you and kind of rip you apart and then, you know,